Hey, welcome back to Guided by Faith. I'm your host, Jay Holland. We are walking through Romans 14 this week, which is on a surface level, might feel like a really strange passage to you because it's talking about meat sacrificed to idols. It's talking about which day that you worship or not, but you're going to see that there's a ton of relevance to our lives. Real quickly, favor to ask, if you've not done it, and I know most of you haven't, would you please take a minute and just leave a rating or a review? It is so helpful for other people finding it, and it takes you seconds of your life. So you can do it while this podcast is going on, unless you're driving while this podcast is going on. All right, I want to get into Romans 14. Today we're going to talk about the principle of being a non-judgy judge. All right, so you need to learn how to be a non-judgy judge in your life. Well, what in the world is a non-judgy judge? First off, I want to just acknowledge you're going to have to make judgments, right? If you're driving right now, you are constantly being a judge. You are judging other people on the road. Are they paying attention? Are they going to stay in their lane? Are they looking at their phone? How close can I get to the car in front of me or behind? You're having to make judgments all the time. When you are in social situations, you're going to have to make judgments. You're going to have to make discerning calls about who should I be with, who should I separate with, who's somebody that would be helpful to be in my life, who's somebody that would be harmful. So these are all judgments that you're going to have. And, the Bible tells us that we need to judge. But then you have that statement of Jesus, judge not lest you be judged. And tomorrow we'll talk about how people use that wrong in many ways. But we're not to become judges, even though we have to have judgment all the time. So what in the world is that talking about? Well, in Romans 14, you had this really unique situation where it's very early in the history of the church. The beginning believers were all Jewish, and so they were coming out of a Jewish background where they did not eat pork. They certainly did not eat meat sacrificed to idols, other idols. And they observed the Sabbath religiously, and they observed a year calendar of Jewish festivals. And then a bunch of Gentiles get saved and come to the faith, and there became an argument within the church of who's right. Should you continue to do these Old Testament laws, or are you free to go forward? And Paul addresses some of that in Romans 14 because they were living in a very pagan land where in order to get meat in the market, oftentimes the only thing available to you was meat that had actually been sacrificed to some other idol. And so I experienced this one time in a restaurant in India where I'm pretty sure the food they put in front of me was like sacrificed in honor of Ram or Vishnu or something like that. And it was a really difficult thing in my conscience to be able to eat it. And I was like, I'm so thankful there's Bible verses that address this. Now, Romans 14:2, starting in Romans 14:1, he says, now, bear with those who are weak in the faith, but not for the purposes of passing judgment on them. And he's like, well, what are you talking about weak in the faith? Here was his example. One person believes that he may eat anything, which meant meat sacrificed to idols, while the weak person eats only vegetables. So the weak person, the person who had a weaker faith, was the one who stayed away from meat sacrificed to idols and only ate vegetables because they were afraid of honoring this false god. The strong person in their faith was actually the one who said, look, there are no other gods but God. They're sacrificing to a statue. There might be a demon behind it, but I'm not worshiping the demon. I'm going to eat me some meat. And Paul actually says that's the person with the stronger faith, which is incredible to think about. But then he goes on to say, let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. So in these verses, what we see is that in both cases, as long as the person is trying to honor God with their decision, God welcomes and honors them. And then Paul says, verse 4, who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It's before his own master that he stands or fall, and he will uphold him, for the Lord is able to make him stand. So this principle, like you're probably not going to have a lot of meat sacrificed to idols things, but here's things you might come across. What if you don't speak in tongues, which I don't speak in tongues. I'm not at a church that speaks in tongues, but you have other Christians that speak in tongues, and you're both in this argument of you're right, you're wrong. Well, you can make a biblical argument for tongues existing, and you can make a biblical argument for them ceasing. And what you need to do is not be judgmental of the other person. If they're aiming to honor the Lord, you honor them. What if it's in listening to music? You think that you can listen to anything. You have a friend who only listens to Christian music. If you can listen to it before the Lord and you would be comfortable listening with Jesus beside you, okay, do it before the Lord, but don't judge each other. The use of social media, the watching of movies, this is always going to be the case. There's going to be times where you have a higher, what you feel like is internal moral compass and moral standard than another believer. And in some of these areas, you're just right. Like, you're staying sexually pure before marriage, or you're abstaining from things that you know are illegal. I'm not talking about things that are illegal, and I'm not talking about things that the Bible specifically forbids. But in the gray areas, you're going to have to make judgment, but you're not allowed to be the judge of another believer. That's just pride. That's just spiritual superiority. And you are called away from that and not towards that. Because what does Paul say? It says, before his own master, meaning God, he'll stand or fall. And God's going to uphold him. God is going to make him stand. So the practices that you need to have is like your severe conviction, like your internal conviction, and stay with them. Don't do things just because other people are doing them, even spiritual things, because if other people are doing them, if it makes you uncomfortable. But don't judge other people that do those specific things. Again, I'm not talking about clearly illegal or unethical or immoral things. I'm talking about that big gray area in life. Use biblical principles to figure it out, but don't sit in judgment of others. So that's what it means to be a non-judgy judge. And we're going to talk more about God judging us tomorrow, and how some people use that as a free pass in a very, very ridiculous, dumb way. I bet you can't wait for that. Have a great day. I will talk to you tomorrow. It's been good to spend time with you today.